Welcome to Em.Powercoaching. Discover how to reinvent yourself, find self-empowerment, and live a more positive and fulfilling lifestyle. Em.Powercoaching combines mental and physical fitness to help you connect the dots to unveil a more confident, energized, and empowered version of you. So, if you're ready, let's get into today's episode. Please be aware that today's subject is highly sensitive as we discuss the causes, symptoms and triggers of bulimia nervosa. If you have or suspect that you may have an eating disorder, please consult your healthcare provider. Advice and information can be found on the podcast show notes. Okay, hello everyone and welcome to today's episode of Em.Powercoaching podcast. So it is currently Mental Health Awareness Week and I've dedicated a few of my podcasts to raising awareness around mental health disorders. And today I am joined by psychotherapist Sarah and we're going to be discussing the eating disorder bulimia. So I'm going to let Sarah introduce herself to you guys. Hello Sarah.
Hi Emma, thanks so much for having me on. Yes, my name is Sarah Dosanjh and I'm a psychotherapist and I specialise with working with people struggling with binge eating, all manner of kind of disordered eating disorders. I myself struggled from binge eating disorder and bulimia for a number of years, which is a big part, I think, of why I decided to do what I do now.
Brilliant. And I think the best people who can coach others are the ones who have actually been through that and understand where the certain individuals are coming from. We'll get into it a little bit more later, but you're also an author, which is exciting.
Yes, I released a book this year called I Can't Stop Eating.
So I had a little look at that and I'm going to put a link to it underneath the podcast show notes, because when I was having a little look, I was just thinking how beneficial that would have been for me to have had that material when I was going through bulimia myself. So I'll definitely put a link for the listeners underneath the show notes. So today's show is really kind of raising awareness around bulimia and understanding what the eating disorder is. There's quite a few types of eating disorders, so it's kind of like defining bulimia nervosa and really understanding what it is. So are you able to simplify the definition of bulimia for the listeners?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, some of the characteristics of bulimia is there tends to be binge eating involved, and by binge eating that's considered to be a larger quantity of food than the average person would eat in similar circumstances. So it doesn't count, like if you go on holiday and it's an all-inclusive buffet and everyone's kind of going to town, especially on the first day, that wouldn't technically be a binge in terms of like an eating disorder binge. And so in that way it's similar to binge eating disorder, but what makes it bulimia is that there are compensatory behaviours afterwards. So the most common one that people think of with bulimia, they think of purging, so making themselves sick, but it would also include laxatives. It can also include fasting, so people who binge and then don't eat anything for a couple of days, that can come under the definition of bulimia. And even exercise, which I'm sure we'll probably talk into a little bit about, maybe when exercise is healthy and when it's not so healthy with someone with an eating disorder.
Definitely, yes. And like you say, it could either be one of those. The definition of purging, isn't it? And then there's the different types. And I think it could either be one of those that you do, or it could be a combination of a few. I remember I definitely did the throwing up. I did the laxatives, which was not nice. Well, none of it's nice. And the over-exercising as well, which, like you say, we'll get into later about when it really becomes unhealthy. So I think a lot of people tend to get bulimia and anorexia a bit confused. Is there anything that sort of separates those two?
I think people think that bulimia is just making yourself sick. So they think that people with bulimia might be eating normally, whatever normal is, but eating normally and then making themselves sick. But it's more than that. It's those really out of control episodes of eating is what makes it bulimia. If you were just eating what someone else might eat and being sick, that would actually come under like anorexia purging subtype. Does that make sense? So I think that's where the two come really close to each other. But with the bulimia, it's the large quantities of food that just feels so out of control. That's also got to be followed by like feelings of disgust, and there's a whole emotional element to whether something's technically bulimia or not.
So what can actually cause bulimia to come on? So I think, again, I feel like anorexia is quite well spoken about, bulimia not so much. So with anorexia, it tends to be that someone is quite linked to body dysmorphia, where they sort of view themselves as being larger than they actually are, and they are on a desperate mission to get their bodies usually to be a lot slimmer and a lot smaller, and they'll do anything in their power to be able to do that. So what actually causes the bulimia, and how does that kind of differentiate?
I think for bulimia to develop, it is almost, I'm trying to think if I can think of an exception, and I think without exception, there's always technically possible it would be. It's triggered off by somebody trying to reduce their food intake.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to diet, that's what leads to the out of control eating. Now, the reasons why someone might try to diet are going to be very varied. For some, it might really come from a place of not feeling good enough, not feeling worthy. And for other people, it may not be as emotional as that. It may simply be, they maybe gained a few pounds and they just want to lose a small amount of weight. And it's not that emotional, but it's that attempt to override the body's appetite signals that normally get people in such a mess with eating disorders.
So it's a bit of a horrible cycle that you kind of just go through with that, isn't it? What would be the signs of bulimia? So for someone who, let's say, is binging and they're throwing up, that doesn't necessarily mean that they understand that they've got bulimia. I mean, I think I went it was about 5 years before I was diagnosed. I just thought that I was in a place where I was trying to be a little skinny mini, and every now and then I would overindulge on the foods that I was restricting quite often, ice cream, cookies, all the kind of things that are seen as bad food, quote unquote. And so for me, I just thought that it was me, wanting to let go, overindulge, and then I'd immediately feel guilty, and so I would then purge. But for someone who is possibly doing that but not aware that they've got bulimia, what are the sort of like telltale signs?
It's interesting because when I listened to your story and you said in there like about how you didn't realize you had bulimia until you were diagnosed, it made me think, because for me, the moment I purged for that first time, I was like, this is bulimia. And I remember that word coming into my head in that moment. It was so, because I'd been struggling with binge eating disorder for a while. And for me, I think there was something about that tipping point, which, and this is just like where my mind was at the time, that then made it feel like a more legitimate eating disorder. Because like binge eating disorder has so much kind of misunderstandings and misconceptions around it just being a lack of control. But bulimia somehow felt like a proper eating disorder, which was just, I think of that now and I'm like, whoa. Yeah. So for me, I realized straight away, but I was having a conversation with not a client, this was a friend who has a difficult relationship with food, and she described taking laxatives a lot. Yeah. And when I used the word bulimia to her, she was really shocked. And we kind of sort of decided to end the conversation there because it was just not an area that she wanted to go into. But I think there are people that use laxatives that wouldn't see it as bulimia. But also, if you think about it, bulimia is just a word that we're using to try and understand an experience. So like anything, it's on a scale. But I think the bit where people don't realize is when they're in that stage where they think they can stop if they really wanted to. So I don't have an eating disorder because actually, if I just wanted to enough, I could stop. When I was a teenager, I remember like a lot of my friends were smoking, and I remember I'd smoke sometimes. And I remember saying to myself, the minute I get that first craving, I'm going to stop because I don't want to be addicted. I don't know what I thought a craving was going to be, but of course I missed it. And it wasn't until like one evening where I was literally like gathering all my pennies together to go and buy cigarettes, where I thought, oh, I can't just stop,
Right.
you know? And I think that is where perhaps people won't realise how big of a problem it's become, or realise it is bulimia, because they think, yeah, okay, this isn't great, but they believe they can stop. And then when they really try to stop, and I think for you, when it really came to a head, where I think you were in class or something and you sort of fell into tears, when you realise you're out of control, that's the point, I think, where people realise it's an eating disorder.
Yeah, totally agree. I think I can't quite remember how it all first kind of started for me, but I think it started with over exercising and laxative. I think that's how I first started to control it. And then the sort of sickness came later on as the binges got much bigger, and I knew that a laxative just wouldn't be enough, and that the exercise would have to be intense to get rid of that. But yeah, so going back to what you were saying then, obviously when I was in the class and I had the breakdown, and then my tutor came and had a word with me and referred me to the on-site counsellor, that was like the start of the process for then when I was referred to the doctor, and then they sort of diagnosed the bulimia. So, but the breakdown was something very separate. That was to do with my emotions and what I was going through in that time. It wasn't necessarily a breakdown because I was thinking about the issue that I had bulimia or an eating disorder, right. Which, you know, is interesting, because then it makes you think, and I think that this is very true for most cases, that bulimia isn't necessarily an eating disorder that's around food as such. I believe that it kind of comes from a deeper meaning, so something that you're possibly struggling with elsewhere emotionally. Would you agree with that? Do you think it's more of a struggle with an emotional problem or a situation in life rather than just food?
Yeah, it's complex, and I think one of the reasons why it's hard to treat is, like, most practitioners focus on one or the other, when I think both for a lot of people are present. And one thing we know is that purging releases endorphins in the brain, so it can be a real way of, like, physically resetting yourself. A lot of people describe feeling calmer afterwards, this idea of it being a release. There's so much as well. There's been a lot written about bulimia and anger. For people that really, I don't know what your relationship's like with anger, but a lot of people who struggle with bulimia struggle to express anger. They sort of stuff it down. Maybe anger wasn't a safe emotion in the past, so you don't know how to have healthy anger. So yeah, I think the emotional element, and of course when you stop any behavior like that, any coping mechanism, you're left with you, that time with
Isn't
yourself.
That scary? It's like you say, it's quite complex, isn't it? It can come from all kind of areas of life, really. For me, I think it was definitely that I struggled with the emotions and how I was connecting to that, and I definitely had anger inside me because of present family issues that were going on, and like you say, stuffed it down. And possibly the link of how it really sort of evolved into becoming something bigger.
I think there might be a slight difference here in our experience, because it sounds like you were very aware that there were these emotional difficulties you were having, and then the eating was there. For me, like, as far as I was concerned, this was the only problem in my life. The problem was the eating disorder, and if I got rid of the eating disorder, everything would be fine. I don't think I was aware of the emotional stuff for me when I was in it.
Yeah, do you know, you saying that, I think I'm saying it now because I now have insight and I've managed to connect. So yeah, I'm glad you said that, because yes, at the time I didn't have that connection, I didn't have that insight, and it was just all about the eating disorder, and that was my big issue at the time, and what made me feel like an outcast. But yeah, I guess, you know, going through the recovery and having the insight, it's taught me to connect the two, and actually that's possibly where it was coming from. What does a typical binge look like? I'd be interested to know what you kind of went through on that. I think, like you say, just saying the word binge, to some people that could mean when you sat on the sofa and you go through a full pack of family-sized crisps or a full tub of Pringles, or it could mean something much more. So what's your idea of a
I think
binge?
I would divide binges into subjective and objective. So a subjective binge is something like, so some people feel like they binged just because they've eaten something they said they weren't going to. So even a chocolate bar or a couple of biscuits could feel like a binge to that person in those circumstances. So the distress is just the same. So like in my mind, it's just as legitimate, even though it's not something that someone would say objectively is a large amount of food. And then like objectively, as objective as we can be, and my mind kind of goes to like 800 calories upwards of certain kinds of food, but it's more the experience of eating and how out of control it feels.
Right.
But I know, like for me, when I look at the like sheer volume of food that I was able to consume in my eating disorder, it's just astonishing. It's like how did like the laws of biology and physics allow that? I don't know. But yeah, and like perhaps there should be a trigger warning at the beginning of this episode, but it could easily be like, you know, a pint of ice cream, whole packet of biscuits, several like cakes, like all the, for me it was always the sweet stuff, and a lot of people find that it tends to be the sugary foods, but not always. And then you're so sicked out on the sugary foods, you then need something salty to balance it out, and then people can end up switching between the two and all of that. So yeah, an extraordinary amount of food in a very short space of time.
Yeah, it's that always used to really baffle me, even though I was doing it. Is the sheer amount of food that being consumed within such a short amount of time. Like we're talking an hour maximum of just masses of food. And you know, when I think back to it now, I think how did my body even get to that point? But this is what makes bulimia quite severe and dangerous to our bodies, because that amount of food all going in at one time has its own has its predicaments, doesn't it? Like it's not just bloat, like you can actually damage your stomach lining and then also your esophagus from throwing up, right? So I think there's quite a lot of danger that's associated with having bulimia as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges with recovery is that people want to recover by stopping binging. And sometimes recovery has to start with stopping purging. Because when you can purge, you can binge over and over again. Yeah. And so people, if they're like, well, if I didn't binge, that's the problem, then I wouldn't purge. But sometimes that commitment, so certainly for me, just to talk from my story, it was a commitment to no longer purge. So it was difficult because then the binging was still around for a while, but I had committed not to purge, because there is a limit when you're not purging with how much you can binge. There is a limit. Yeah. But if you're purging, it's limitless.
Yeah, that's exactly how it was for me as well. I think it was the day that I sort of decided, right, that's it, this has to stop. It didn't stop the binging. And also it didn't just stop. Like I want to make that very clear that this doesn't just happen overnight, does it? At least not for the majority of people. It is a process. But yeah, the turning point was the same as you. I dedicated myself to not purge anymore, and because I was seeing the physical effects that it was having on my body. You know, more blood was coming up through the sickness. I don't know if you ever had it with your teeth, but my teeth kind of went like see-through. And so I said, right, the purging needs to at least stop. And then the binges continued for a little while. And then over time, it all eventually, you know, sort of just died down and became manageable and controllable. So yeah, that's really interesting that you've said that, because I think a lot of people would think the binging needs to stop first. I need to control the amount of food that I eat first. Whereas actually it's probably the other way around, isn't it?
That's what keeps people stuck. And it's so scary to do it the way around. It has to be done because, you know, you might gain weight. And some people are going to see that. And so that's really, really, when you've been battling with this for so long, that can be an incredibly difficult thing to accept.
Mm-hmm. So that's very much about breaking the cycle, isn't it? The sort of like first steps. And that's what your book's all about, breaking that binging cycle. So what kind of things do you talk about within the book that sort of helps the readers to understand and manage that cycle of bulimia?
Yeah. Well, I think there's so much around sort of an eating disorder or a difficult relationship with food that turns into an inner conflict. So you're fighting with yourself. that's why it's exhausting. That's why it feels like you never win, because you're both sides of the fight, whichever way you go. You know, you manage not to binge, you might feel deprived and anxious, or if you binge, you feel disgusted and depressed and anxious again.
Yeah.
So I think the big part of it is, one, and particularly with something like binge eating disorder, where it doesn't seem that people are restricting or compensating, they're always planning to. If there's guilt around food, there's part of you that's saying that you shouldn't be eating food. And once I also think different people's bodies respond differently to restriction. So I think some people can reduce their calorie intake, lose weight, and the body and brain don't seem to be okay with that. And other people, like, it sets off something completely different, to the point where even a whisper of restriction can be enough to, like, set binging off.
Yeah.
So for me, it's really about the things that I go on about in the book are about being present, because any kind of like binging, purging, it's all a way of escape as well. So that ability, like I said earlier, like if you stop the binging and purging, what are you left with?
Yeah.
And I see recovery as a creative process. People are so focused on what it is they want to stop. But if you keep focusing on like what the problem is, quite often you create more of the problem. So when I say, like, what does life look like without this? A lot of people don't know. They know what they don't want, but they don't know what they do want. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole idea around creative process, creating something new rather than losing something old, because it can feel like giving something up when we give up using food to manage the way that we're feeling. But instead of like letting go of something, what are we choosing instead that's just incompatible with that? And I talk a lot about intention rather than rules, because when people are trying, they think the answer to being out of control is to become more controlled. So then they swing between being in control and out of control, and it's backwards and forwards. And people that struggle with eating disorders, there's a lot of all or nothing thinking. There's a lot of that challenged in the book as well. And identifying where the line is for you, where eating is a problem. Because if it was like alcohol or something like that, and you struggle with alcohol, it's easy to draw that line and say, okay, like I can't have this.
Yeah.
But when it's food, we have to find our own line so that we know when we've stepped over it, because our brains will convince us, oh, it's fine to do this. And then afterwards, when we get to the other side of it, we're feeling sick, we've felt out of control again, and it wasn't fine.
This is it, because you can't exactly go teetotal on food, can you?
No. Exactly.
You need it to survive. So at some point, you have to eventually go back to it. But then it's finding that balance and not trying to just control it, because that is essentially what you were doing before. It's just a sort of a different way of controlling it, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how does bulimia affect an individual? Not just on the body, on the physical side, because we've discussed that, but how does it affect an individual's social life, work life, education, all that kind of stuff? How does it actually play a role on an individual?
I think, well, I mean, obviously, first of all, it does vary from person to person, but I think when you've been fighting something like an eating disorder, and because of the all or nothing thinking that's often around, and I heard you mention it in your earlier one, like you would not have binged or purged for 2 weeks, and you'd be like, I'm fixed, I'm healed, everything's like amazing and wonderful. And there were so many times where I thought I had this licked, and then I didn't. Yeah. So it's that sense of like, you feel like you're breaking promises to yourself over and over again. And that, I think, is what destroys like self-esteem and this relationship we have with ourselves and this inability to trust ourselves. So I think that's really corrosive. And then I think eating disorders, they thrive in secrecy. A lot of people don't talk to many others about it. I can remember like being out at social occasions where I would normally have had so much fun and just been like, I just want to leave and go home and binge.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
So yeah, like it puts an enormous effect on everything. And that idea that like what's going on for you and how you see yourself is so different to how other people see yourself. Like the bigger that gap is between where you are and what other people see, I think that's where we feel really isolated and disconnected, and you know, we could be surrounded by people, but if we don't feel like anyone really sees us or what's going on, we feel like we're all alone in the world.
Yeah, I can totally relate. When I was at university, in my third year, my final year, I think it was, that's when it kind of like really sort of hit its peak. And it was also a time when, everyone was making the most of the last year of university before leaving, spending time with their friends. And yeah, I would just be thinking, oh, I just want to go home and go to the shop, buy a load of stuff in, and just sit in my little cocoon and binge away. And that there was just such an overwhelming feeling to a need to do that, that I wouldn't really be focusing on the social events. And there was so many times where I would actually cancel, just film nights, or going out for a couple of drinks, or going out for a meal, just so that I could have a binge, which, it sounds ridiculous now, but at the time, that was so overpowering, and that would just kind of like control everything.
Mm-hmm.
So like you say, it's, it can really affect your social life. And then, yeah, I think there's a lot of feelings of shame, and very, very like low confidence as well, not feeling worthy. And I think that can reflect over into your work life as well. I guess a lot of the thoughts there are going to transfer into how you feel like you can achieve within your work. So let's say you're trying to progress, you're trying to get a job that's higher up. Can't think of the word, it's totally gone out of my head.
Promotion.
There we go, thank you. Sometimes the most simple words you can't remember. You're trying to get a promotion, and there can often be feelings of, oh, well, who's going to give me a promotion if this is the type of person that I am?
Yeah.
If I can't control eating, how can I be seen as someone of responsibility?
Yeah. I used to think if I can't even feed myself properly, like one of the most basic things that a human being does, like what does that mean about me? And it made it mean lots of not very nice things.
No. So, and I guess, because of that mentality, is this why bulimia comes underneath the mental disorder umbrella? Because I think a lot of people don't realise that it is a mental disorder,
Mm-hmm.
a mental health disorder.
When it comes to labels, I think it's helpful in terms of getting help or getting treatment. But I think the word disorder just has a huge amount of like stigma around it.
Yeah.
I think of it more as like you're dysregulated.
Okay.
Like emotionally, physically, like everything's dysregulated, and you're trying to be regulated again.
Mm-hmm. I like that word.
Yeah, but I think again, it's language. So for some people, like it just helps to say, like, this is a mental disorder. It's not me, and that might feel comforting. Mm-hmm. And to other people, it might feel stigmatizing. Mm-hmm. So, like, whatever you call it, for me, is like not important unless it's going to impact how you manage to get help and support for it.
Yeah, I think what I mean is it's not something that you can just stop. And I think that's where all of these types of mental health fall into that category, because it's not something that we have control of necessarily. It's not something where we can just one day say, okay, I'm going to stop doing this now and I'm going to go back to how I was before.
How many times did you say that to yourself, Emma?
A lot.
Like tomorrow I'm just going to be a better version of myself. I'm going to be a different person. This is not going to be a problem. I'm not going to let it be a problem. Yeah, and I think that's the important thing, is that people feel like they should be able to do that, and it's not. I don't know that it's possible with something like this.
Mm-hmm. I think the other thing with bulimia as well is that it's really hard for others to notice, and it's very easy to keep it a secret as the individual. A lot of the time, the binges you would do in private, because who's going to do that in front of someone? Especially if you've got that shame connected to it. The last thing that you want to be doing is sitting around at a family meal and absolutely stuffing your face in. So a lot of the stuff is done in private, and then again, the purging afterwards can almost help an individual to maintain their body image. So there might not be much of a shift in change in that necessarily. And because of the shame that's linked to it, I think it's quite hard for people to be open and to speak about it. I know I didn't. I mean, we're 11 years down the line, from when it all started with me, and I've only really in the past year or so felt comfortable with opening up 11 years later, so I think, it is hard to talk about, as with many, mental health topics. So let's say a family member is noticing maybe some signs or has some concerns for a loved one that might be having an issue or problems with connecting with food. How can they, what can they do?
Mm-hmm. I think people are not going to talk about it until they're ready to talk about it. So I think when it's a loved one, I think it's just a case of saying, this is what I'm noticing, and are you okay? Mm-hmm. And the person might say, yeah, no, I'm fine. They might just brush it off and just say okay, well, if you don't feel okay about this, I'm here and I won't judge. Mm-hmm. I think there's something about that, because people don't talk a lot because they feel so ashamed. They're worried about judgment, that people are just going to say, well, just stop doing it then, and all of that. And, here in the UK, we've got Beat Charity. They've got helplines that are really good for advice and support. So I think it's quite difficult if there's a family member struggling with this. Maybe you're the one who needs support because you're helpless. You can't stop someone's eating disorder for them. You just need to look after yourself and need to just gently remind them that you're there, and just offering if there's anything you can do. I think it can feel really invasive if someone were to come in and start trying to fix something that you're not ready to fix.
Definitely, yeah.
It's such a personal thing. It's no one else can do it, can come in and really change that.
Yeah.
But knowing that people care and are concerned might be enough in those moments when, if you're in despair, you might reach out.
So we spoke about how to notice the telltale. I can't say that word. I need to just stop saying it. Signs, if you are the individual suffering. But what about the signs if you're concerned about a loved one? Are there any other signs that could potentially show?
Mm-hmm. It's tricky because I think so many people don't have a comfortable relationship with food, especially women, men as well, and more so. Mm-hmm. So if I think of the way that my girlfriends talk about food and body and their weight and all of that, it's quite hard, I think, to necessarily know at what point is it something much more concerning. So I suppose it would be sort of changes in mood, changes in how they're eating, whether it's avoiding eating. I would just look out for anxiety, especially around food.
Yeah.
And then to just say I notice you've been feeling, and always I think that I notice part. So I noticed that you haven't been wanting to have dinner with us. Is everything okay?
Yeah.
And so that idea, if someone's withdrawing, it could be for all kinds of reasons, not necessarily an eating disorder. And like you said, it's so easy to hide. And with something like bulimia, quite often there aren't particularly big weight changes. Sometimes there are, but a lot of the times there aren't. So it's much easier to hide.
Yeah.
But of course, if you hear someone purging, or there's other behaviors going on, then I would just go back to my earlier point. Kind of things, everything okay? I'm noticing this. I'm here if you want to talk, and I won't judge.
Yeah. Just being there, I suppose, isn't it? And if you do start to have concerns, like you say, can sometimes be a simple case of, just speaking to someone and just asking, is everything okay at the minute? Is anything going on? Because
if you're there, if you're there and they know that you're there, when they have a moment when they feel like they've hit rock bottom, then they'll reach out. So I get a lot of messages, emails from clients at 11 midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, asking for help because they're in despair. And then when I contact them the following day, not quite as bad. And I know those messages, most of the time, they don't turn into somebody who's going to come and see me one-on-one. Sometimes they do, but a lot of the times they don't. So if the person knows that you're there in a moment of despair, maybe they'll come to you, and maybe there's a chance to open up a dialogue and help.
Yeah, wow. And then that's where that's the most important time really to be there for someone. Because that can be the saving grace sometimes, can't it? Just if you just listen and you're open to speaking with them, that can be the saving grace. So it's so important, which just goes to show the importance of opening up and speaking about, these types of struggles that are actually quite common. So I think that's another thing that I want to tap into. So I got into exercise and fitness. I was a lot more dedicated maybe halfway through my bulimia cycle. And I really do strongly believe that it was this that helped me overcome the binging and the purging and that cycle, because I learned the amazing things that my body could do, but I understood the importance of how I had to nourish and respect my body to enable it to be able to do that. And we could dive all the way into that. But what I want to say is that within the fitness industry especially, like I said, I didn't speak about it for years and years and years, and now I am speaking about it more and more. And when I speak to people who work within the fitness industry, so fitness professionals, and we kind of get onto that topic, it's so surprising how many people have had a similar battle or struggle, especially around food. It really surprises me, even still to this day. I'll sort of explain a little bit about how I got into fitness and my reasons, for starting Em.Powercoaching. And then the person that I'm talking to will quite often be like, me too. I've been there as well. And some people are still struggling with that. So they're leading this healthy, quote unquote, lifestyle, exercising, eating well, but they still have issues relating to food. And a lot of that is to do with around control of food. And this is where exercise and fitness can be healthy or it can be unhealthy, because it can either do you wonders in the way that you learn how to nourish your body from the inside and look after your joints and your muscles, but then you can also overdo it and you can almost lose control, I suppose, on that side. So for example, over exercising, like you say, which is actually a form of purging that some people might not be aware of. And then calorie control as well, which I think I actually saw you write a post about on Instagram the other day, about calorie control. Now, it's very common within the fitness industry for someone who is either trying to lose weight or gain muscle to be in control of the calories and to track them on a daily basis and the macros, sometimes right down to the T. But that could potentially be a trigger, right? Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah, I see a lot of my clients are really into their fitness. I think it comes up a lot, and certainly in like the bodybuilding industry as well, all that kind of thing. And I think fitness can be used a way of managing food anxiety. Mm-hmm. And do you know what? If it manages your food anxiety, and that's better than feeling anxious about food all the time, rock on, you do you. Mm-hmm. But it hasn't healed your food anxiety.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So like a lot of people that rely on exercise, and like, because I think you called, like you said, exercise is my therapy. And when I heard you say that, I thought, well, I wonder what happens if you get sick and you can't exercise.
Yeah, all goes downhill.
Then what, when you're with your mind?
Yeah.
So I don't want to kind of like sort of like bash exercising as like that means you haven't recovered because you're just using exercise. Like, no, it's a stage on from where you were, and it's supporting you and it's helping you feel much more comfortable in your body. But it's become something that for a lot of people, they need it. And to some degree, like we all need movement in our lives, like in our bodies, most of our bodies respond well. Mm-hmm. But have you seen those studies they've done of people that derive no physical benefits from exercise at all? I think it's just extraordinary. Like their aerobic capacity doesn't go up, their insulin resistance, that they don't become more insulin sensitive, all the things that we expect to see from exercise. So it's really tricky, I think, in your position where like on your platform, this is what you are kind of presenting to people as a really like helpful way of like how to manage that. Because I think some people could use what you do as a way to shame themselves, or even to feel more triggered by being told, because some people will hear it as being told, even though you're just saying, like, this is what's helped me and maybe it'll help you. Some people will see that as being told that this is what they're supposed to do, and then shame themselves when they don't see the results or they're not able to.
Oh my God, yeah, absolutely nail on head there. When I first got into it and I was given my own calories to be tracking and specific foods, I actually got a diet plan that had, so it wasn't just how many calories I had to have each day. It was, this is what you're going to have for breakfast, this is what you're having for lunch, dinner, and then this is what you can have for your snacks if you want. And if I went the tiniest bit off that plan, I felt the biggest amount of guilt and shame, you know? And honestly, it could just be something like I decided to have an extra piece of toast that day, or I decided to have some more peanut butter on that toast that day. And that could be it, just something tiny, or a yogurt, right? But if it was off the plan that I was given, I just felt like a failure. That's it. I failed. I've completely failed. And then that would sometimes trigger a binge then, because I was almost like, well, I failed at this now, you know, I might as well just continue and keep eating crap all day, even though it could have literally it could have been a carrot, honestly. That's how sensitive it was, you know. And luckily I've kind of like moved away from that thinking now. And with my clients, I definitely still encourage them, depending on their goal. But if it is a weight loss goal and, you know, it's really affecting their health, and I encourage them to be more mindful of the calories and to understand what's required for them to actually be able to lose the weight that they need to lose, or fat loss, should I say, not necessarily weight, because I don't really like saying that. I try and encourage people to do it in a flexible kind of way and actually think, right, if you eat more protein, if you eat more vegetables, you know, get more fibre in your diet, then by being satisfied and feeling full on the right foods, you're less likely to then get the cravings on the other side. And that tends to kind of tie in with managing the calories as well. So I think you've got to be really careful about how you go about calorie control, haven't you? And not letting it affect you too much.
So, I mean, for me, like, and in my experience, and just like with people that I've worked with, the minute that weight loss becomes the focus, the relationship with food is damaged. Just is. So I'm not saying that there aren't people who, like, if your weight has gone much higher as a result of binging and a difficult relationship with food, when you heal your relationship with food, your body may reduce in size anyway. But the moment that becomes the focus for people for whom food is an emotional relationship, and for a lot of us, our relationship with food is an emotional one, I just don't think that it helps. And I think it actually keeps people stuck. So for me, like, and I always tell people, like, in the future, like, fine, if you want to lose, because some people are like, well, that means I can never lose weight if I can't focus on weight loss. And I'll just be like, well, can you put it on the back burner for 3 months while we just focus on, like, the emotions and feeling free around food? And calories, like, as well, like, we have this idea that we all need an X amount of calories a day, but our bodies are so different in, like, how many of the calories we eat that we absorb. The difference between people's, like, caloric needs, and we're trying to use, like, external information to figure out what we're going to eat instead of learning to tune into our bodies. Because, like, I often say, like, if you're really listening to your body, you might find that one day you eat closer to 3,000 calories worth of food, and another day you might actually eat under 1,000, which would normally be like a restrictive day. Sometimes the body wants to eat more, and sometimes it wants to eat less. And it's why I struggle with a lot of programs, the idea of a lot of programs, because and I'm biased because of the kind of people that I work with. There may be people for whom it does work. But yeah, it's something that I generally feel quite strongly about.
Yeah, and I totally get where you're coming from with that as well. I think I would never recommend anyone who is currently going through struggling with an eating disorder to sign up for an exercise or nutrition program. I just wouldn't, because I've turned clients away myself for that reason, because again, like you, I strongly believe that you need to be able to get that connection emotionally first, before going down that route, because it could just make things 10 times worse, or just lose yourself even more. Just really totally just go off track. I think another problem that I suffered with the bulimia is I wasn't aware of my body and how it was feeling, and I wasn't aware of when I felt hungry. Do you have many one-on-ones that sort of can relate to that, where they just don't actually know when they feel hungry anymore?
Yeah. Oh yeah, like the hunger signals get thrown way off. And also, if you think about it, like hunger's a feeling, right? So when when food produces so many other feelings as well, how do you differentiate like what feeling is hunger, what feeling is something else? That ability to tune into the body and know, I think it's really difficult. So I'm a big fan of like the idea of sort of mindful eating, when you start really paying attention to what you're eating and just noticing the body, even if you can't tell, just that like intention to sort of tune in and be like, okay, I'm listening, but I can't hear anything yet. But the more you come back to that, I think the more you start picking up and learning. So I quite like the intuitive eating model. I think that's really helpful for getting back in touch with your appetite. So yeah, I think it can be quite complex. And a lot of people, they think hunger is a rumbling stomach. And so people can't understand why, when they've been on a diet for 6 months, why, when they're completely stuffed, they still want to eat. But like their brain is still hungry, right?
I think it's actually quite complex, hunger. It is very difficult to understand, and like you say, not most people, but it's quite common for people to not fully understand what hunger means, whether it is a signal in the brain or whether it's a stomach rumbling, which actually tends to be a sign that you've gone too far, that you're almost entering starvation, isn't it? So yeah. So what was a turning point for you? And because obviously you're now specialising in this area, you're a psychotherapist. So I think that the fact that you've been through it, that you've experienced it, and now you've turned this into your profession to help other people find a way through that as well. So what was the kind of turning point for you in the sense of like recovery that then has obviously driven you to do what you do now?
I'd love to say there was one particular turning point, but there were a few, I think, important realizations along the way. I think one, realizing that the mental cost of purging was not worth it. Like it really got to the point where it just wasn't worth it. It was that was the most frightening time, I think. I was actually really frightened. So that was part of it, making the decision not to purge, no matter how uncomfortable I was and no matter how much I'd eaten. That was the big part. I think for me, realizing that even restrictive thinking triggered the urge to binge, for me, was a really important realization. So even that idea of like, okay, like I've binged today, so tomorrow I'm going to be really strict. That mental process would just set off the urge to binge again. But actually I got to a point where if I'd binged and I said, okay, well, tomorrow I'm going to really listen to my hunger, and I'm going to try and like respond to my body as closely as I can. What ended up happening is that following day I tended to eat a lot less anyway, but it wasn't coming from a restrictive, rule-bound place. So I learned how to re-regulate myself afterwards, because it was I'd say a couple of years of semi-recovery where I'd go through phases of binging again, and then I would manage to regulate myself again, and then I would slip off again. Realizing that how I felt was more important than what my body looked like. Because there's this idea that if we can get our body to look a certain way, then we'll feel comfortable. And realizing that actually there were ways to feel comfortable now. Yeah. I think that was a big part of it. And learning to be able to be present in my own company. I used to avoid it, like if it wasn't on my phone, like just constant distractions, listening to a podcast, listening to an audiobook. And now I take time to really sit and notice my thoughts much more. Because when you develop the ability to notice your thoughts, you see how the same patterns play out again and again. So then when you're thinking something, rather than believing it, you're like, oh, I'm having thoughts, I'm having thoughts about weight loss, for example, or I'm having thoughts about. But I had a strange moment, like during the lockdown at one point, where I had a thought like I could go buy a load of stuff, binge and purge, and like, but to think the whole thing together, like the binge and the purge for me was just like really, and I was like, but because I know that that's just a thought and I'm not identified with that thought any moment, I was like, gosh, that's really like, what's going on for me that thought about purging as well, which I haven't like stopped years ago, would come to me at that time. So there's a bit of ramblings there, but I think those are some of the most important realizations that put the puzzle together for me.
So I think what's coming out of that is possibly the fact that you had insight. Would you agree with that? That you actually had awareness of your triggers, of what could potentially be dangerous for it, and the types of things that you knew that you needed to do and that worked for you to be able to manage that. And I think insight is a massive thing in terms of recovery, to be able to really identify and clarify what it is that you're doing, like the actions that you're taking, where might that have stemmed from, what could have triggered that, and what works for you in terms of being able to pull yourself out of that moment and distract yourself. So that is, I think it's quite a powerful thing to be able to have the insight, but that doesn't just happen, again, that's another process, a long process sometimes of being able to get.
We can only get insight if we're prepared to sit with ourselves and whatever's going on, whether that's in therapy, because one thing therapy does is it forces you to sit at least for an hour a week with what's going on for you. And I think that can be helpful, because sometimes it's the kind of thing we might put off or we just don't want to do. And that can happen in any kind of general counselling. It doesn't have to be like eating disorder treatment.
So what are the type of things that you sort of specifically do one-on-one with individuals who have just come to you because they're struggling with bulimia?
I think it varies a bit kind of from client to client, but I think a big part of it is like, where does somebody want to get to? That idea, like if we're doing this creative process, like the way I work is very collaborative. It's not like I've got a 10-week program that we work through week by week, because people are so different, and because something like binge eating or bulimia is so complex, for some people, like the physiological part of it will be really strong. So I've worked with clients that when they've given up dieting and given themselves permission to eat, a lot of it's resolved itself, like a surprising amount, just simply from that realization of how that was driving it, which shows that the physiological part of it was really strong for them. Other people might come with a bit more complex trauma. Some people that comes up a lot with eating disorders is around like food in the family, and it's really quite common that women with eating disorders have had mothers with eating disorders as well. So there's a huge amount to kind of be unpicked. So there's a lot about like, what do they really value? Because if you grow up in a household where like weight and what you eat is so like intrinsically linked to your worthiness, that's somebody else's value that you have now absorbed because you believe that your parents are representing what's important in the world. So questioning values and really kind of choosing your values, I think, is an enormous part of it as well. And then might use intuitive eating for like appetite retraining. That's helpful for some people. So there's a variety of tools, but I think of it's collaborative between the two of us, because the client is the expert on them, and I'm the expert. Sounds a bit grand, but I've certainly got experience of like helping people work through their process in this area. So it's like we're like two co-detectives, if you like, working the case together. And I think the relationship between therapist and client it's been shown over and over again, actually, like in research, that's one of the transformative elements for people as well. If you don't click with your therapist, you need to be looking for someone else.
My gosh, that it plays such a huge role. I totally agree with that, because at the end of the day, you are most likely in a very vulnerable place. You're opening up to a complete stranger about something that you probably can't even speak to your family and friends about. So the trust and the relationship 100% needs to be there, definitely. I guess that's what makes a really great coach to be working with, is someone who can relate. So how can people find more information about yourself and any sort of like tips and advice? In fact, let's start with that first of all. If someone is listening to the show right now and they are either currently going through some struggles themselves, or they are aware that a loved one are going through some struggles, if you could sort of like give, let's say, just 3 tips of what someone could do now, like after sort of turning off the podcast, you know, what sort of 3 things could you advise someone to do?
Yeah. Well, one, obviously professional help is great if you can access it. It's not accessible for all. And I think there's a danger of thinking that the only way to recover is through therapy. And I don't agree with that. I didn't recover until I stopped going to therapy, believe it or not. And I've had, examples of people who've had like just not great times in therapy. So my first thing would be like, don't think you have to have therapy. Mm-hmm. If you can get it, it might not be a bad idea. I think like finding resources out there, I think is really, really helpful. There are so many good podcasts and things on YouTube, and even social media is a really great place for getting support if you're following the right people. So I think there's something about knowing that you're not alone is extremely powerful. And it really helps with the shame front. When you hear people talking about the amount of times people have said it's like you're saying what's in my own head, like you can read my mind. I'm like, no, it's just like you're not alone in this. There are a lot of us that are thinking and feeling this way. Yeah. So I think seeking that out, I think, can be enormously helpful for people. And I'm big into, like, for me, like reading. There was quite a few books that I read that really helped me out. Like there was no one book that I read and I was like, this is the answer. But I read quite a few different books and I picked different things out of the different books. So like I often suggest people go to the Intuitive Eating book. That's a really good one. And I like anything by Janine Roth as well. I'm a big fan of her kind of work too. And also, like, if you're listening to this and realizing you might have a problem, and let's say you haven't realized that before, people want to like jump in and change straight away. A little bit like we were talking about, the idea that tomorrow I'll stop doing it. Like, okay, someone's listening to this, they're going, oh my goodness, I self-diagnosed as having bulimia and now I need to fix this straight away. I think there's something really important in the contemplation stage of change. So just contemplating the idea of changing and what you think change would mean to you, I think is really helpful. And noticing, like, what are the things you're telling yourself around food? So like a little bit of journaling, that kind of thing can help as well. But I think so often we don't want to sit in self-contemplation. We want to rush out and find an answer. But recovery is it's an inside-out job. And so many of us try and make it an outside-in job. And that just doesn't work. We get frustrated over and over again because we think this book that seemed amazing, now that we've read this book and we know this stuff, tomorrow morning we can wake up and be different.
If only it was that simple.
I know. Yeah.
Oh, that's some really great advice there, so thank you. Listen, if the listeners want to reach out to you, how can they do that? Where can we find you?
Yeah, so I go by the name The Binge Eating Therapist pretty much everywhere. So my website is thebingeeatingtherapist.com. That's my name on Instagram, and I've got a YouTube channel under that name as well. So you can find me in all those places. You can always message me on Instagram or via my website.
That's brilliant. And I will also put some links to those on underneath the podcast show notes as well. So if anyone wants to reach out to Sarah, then you can just find the links to her social pages and website on the podcast show notes. Sarah, thank you so much for giving me your time today.
Thanks for having me, Emma. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. And I really hope that even if we've just reached out to one person listening to this, that is the aim and the goal of this podcast, is to raise awareness and to hopefully get people talking and understanding more about eating disorders and bulimia. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you.